Hello, my name is David Vogel. You might recognize me. I was a guest of Maureen Moakley's on December 12, 2011. It was my introduction to Access Public Television here in Rhode Island. I will be hosting a program that's going to cover a wide range of topics starting tonight. We have our guest tonight is Roberto Gonzales. He's an immigration lawyer in East Providence, and he is here to speak about the DREAM Initiative or DREAM Act. I'll let him explain that here in Rhode Island. Welcome, Roberto. Let's start with your background. You've been involved with education for quite a while, and why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your background and how you became involved with what we're going to talk about tonight, which is the DREAM Act or the DREAM Initiative, and I'll let you explain that.
Well, good evening, David, and thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure.
I've been involved in education since I graduated from Rhode Island College back in 1975. I stayed on and worked in an educational program at the college, and I went on to serve on the school board in Providence for 12 years. So I got involved with educational policy, and I've always had an interest in education, and after I became a lawyer, I didn't give up that interest in education. And after becoming a lawyer, I started to realize that there was a huge need for helping immigrants, particularly children who had come to this country at a very young age, who didn't have legal papers. In other words, these were kids that were brought in by their parents when their parents immigrated, and because they came in at a young age, in many cases they grew up believing that they were essentially U.S. citizens, just like all of their friends. They go to Boy Scouts together, they play on the soccer fields together, and they go to school together, and they had no reason to believe that they were anything but American. So that's how I got involved with helping immigrants, particularly in this area of education.
Okay, let's talk about the DREAM Act a little bit. The DREAM Act is something that the people in the audience probably have heard about. It's kind of a misnomer here in Rhode Island, my understanding. There's the federal DREAM Act, which I'll let you explain has not been passed yet, and there's the state version. There is, in Rhode Island, we have a state version. In 13 other states, we have versions, but why don't you take a few minutes to explain about the difference between what the DREAM Act would be at the federal level were it to pass, and where the states have taken up the slack. And obviously we're talking about Rhode Island, but let's start with an explanation for the audience of what the federal act would look like and what it would mean.
David, the federal DREAM Act is a law that, if it passes, it will allow these very same children that we were just talking about, children who are undocumented, to legalize their status, that is, to become permanent residents and eventually citizens of this country. What the DREAM Act says is that if a kid has been here for a long period of time and he has gone to school in this country, has graduated from high school, and he's been a good kid, he's not involved with any criminal activity, hasn't, been involved in gangs or anything like that, then that kid will have an opportunity to apply to the U.S. Immigration Service and get a conditional resident status. With that conditional resident status, they can then either enroll in college or enlist in the military. And if they are successful in completing their college or their military experience, they can then, in 6 years, apply to become permanent residents and U.S. citizens eventually in this country. Now, that's quite different from the state law, which we call it the Tuition Equity Act, which what that does is it provides an opportunity for these students to attend the 3 state institutions. That's CCRI, Rhode Island College, and URI, at the in-state rates. So instead of having to pay an out-of-state rate, which is 3 times what the in-state rate is, or nearly 3 times, they can go to school and pay the in-state rate. And what this is doing is it's allowing these kids to actually go to school, because these kids cannot afford the out-of-state rate.
Nobody can.
Nobody can, right? They can barely afford the in-state rate. And I should say, this bill passed. It passed through the Board of Governors as a policy change.
Okay.
And the Board of Governors passed it in September. And so it is now scheduled to take effect this coming September. And finally, these students will be allowed to go to school, and they get absolutely no financial aid. They get no money from the federal government. They get no money from the state government. The only thing they get is the lower tuition rate. So this is a win-win for the state, because they're going to realize tuition payments which they otherwise would not.
If I understand correctly, then, if they're getting no state aid of any kind, no federal aid of any kind, the administrative costs of having this program in place, zero?
Well, the administrative costs would essentially be covered by the in-state rate, which is the actual cost of going to school at the colleges that we're talking about. So there's been a study that was done by the Latino Public Policy Institute at Roger Williams School that showed that the state stands to gain about $160,000 in the first year by implementing this change.
And that would be all revenue derived from just tuition?
From tuition that it otherwise would not receive, yes.
Okay. Now, going beyond the graduation, we're talking about students who will not otherwise have an opportunity for an education, who are now getting it. Can the state, or is the state, doing anything to help the students beyond the graduation, or can the state do anything that wouldn't just help the students, but would help the state at large, if you understand what I'm saying? In other words, the students are now getting an opportunity that they don't otherwise get. Wonderful. Where can they go from there? What can Rhode Island do? What can any state that has a similar initiative in place do to ensure that the economic development of the state and the economic development of the children who graduate from these schools is progressive in nature and doesn't just stop at the end of graduation?
Well, number one, when we maximize the educational opportunities of all of our students, the state stands to benefit from that, because a better educated citizenry will be better able to get better paying jobs and pay more taxes. So we believe that there's an indirect economic benefit to the state by having this type of policy in place. Secondly, a lot of these youngsters were in high school were realizing that they had nowhere to go, that they weren't going to be allowed to go to college, and in fact a lot of them were dropping out. And so this is going to help the dropout rate, and by helping the dropout rate, we realize more federal funding for students, since the federal funds that the state receives has a lot to do with the number of students that are staying in school and graduating. So we believe that all of education in the state of Rhode Island will benefit. And of course, one of the other concerns that we have in talking to police officers and police departments is that we're finding that a lot of kids, once they lose hope in school, they tend to get in trouble. And a lot of them end up being an expense to the state, whether it's through the correction systems or through some other the court systems and other ways. So by keeping kids in schools, and I've heard this from a number of police officers, it makes our streets safer.
We're taking liabilities and turning them to assets.
Exactly. Now, there also, of course, there are more things that the state can do. For example, in California and in Texas, they've taken a similar approach with in-state tuition, and they've taken it a step further, and they said not only are we going to allow these youngsters to go to school and pay the in-state rate, but we're also going to make scholarship money, grant money available to them.
While they're still in school.
While they're still in school. So, for example, in Texas and in California, they can apply for state-funded scholarships.
Where they couldn't, they can't in Rhode Island, but they could in those states.
Those are the only 2 states that allow that right now.
Okay.
So, by the way, there are 13 states that had implemented this in-state tuition policy change before Rhode Island.
So we're number 14.
We're number 14.
Question then, if the DREAM initiative, and I know you said it was an tuition equity program. Okay, tuition equity program, DREAM initiative, DREAM Act, whatever you want to call it, it kind of ends up in the same place. If it takes liabilities out of our system and gives us assets, in your opinion, and I have my own opinions, but why has the federal government dropped the ball so badly on this? First, if you could, give us a little bit of a synopsis. How long has it been kicked around at the federal level? And what will it take to finally get Congress to wake up and do something about it? And why hasn't it succeeded to this point?
Well, as we've seen with not only immigration issues, but with many issues that are so important to our country, there are competing political philosophies. There's a lot of demagoguery going on, and one side is blaming the other one side wants to keep the other one from getting anything accomplished because they might look good, they might actually solve problems. So there's this tension in Congress, and that's pretty much the same tension that has been felt over the immigration issue, and the DREAM Act has fallen victim to that. Last time this DREAM Act was up for a vote in front of the Congress, the House of Representatives passed it.
Overwhelmingly, if I recall.
Overwhelmingly.
Yes.
And the U.S. Senate filibustered it, and they got 55 out of the 60 votes that they needed, so it failed at the Senate level, even though a majority of the senators would have voted to pass it. So, for that reason, for the political reasons that seem to be so heated up around the immigration issue, we're not seeing any progress with this issue or with comprehensive immigration reform.
Whole nother topic.
Or the debt, or there's so many other issues that
there are plenty of issues we could
suffer a similar fate. Yeah.
So if I understand, essentially, children are falling victim to politics. Is that basically what it comes down to?
Yeah, that's basically it. Our political system takes hostages, children, women. It doesn't matter. Poor people.
Let's look down the line to the future a little bit. Before we came on air, you were telling me about some of the initiatives that other states have taken. I think you mentioned Utah, where they tried to implement a guest worker statute or something, or a guest worker program. And we were also chatting about some of other things that Rhode Island could do. Talk about a little bit about that for the audience. What can beyond the walls of the colleges? What can Rhode Island do licensing businesses? I think you'd mentioned about motorists and insurance. And what can Rhode Island do to get the immigrants, after they're educated, more integrally involved so that they become really good, productive members of the society?
Right. Well, unfortunately, the states have very limited powers when it comes to the area of immigration. So, for example, a state cannot pass a law that's going to give legal immigration status to a group of people who reside in that state. Utah tried that with a guest worker program.
Explain explain how that works.
Well, Utah is in dire need of bringing in laborers to work the crops, to work in their poultry, and to work in a number of jobs where they just don't have sufficient workers. So Utah is trying to attract foreign workers to come to Utah. They wanted to offer them legal status if they came to Utah, and the federal government said, no, you can't do that.
So the federal government said no, even though it was a benefit.
Exactly. And similarly, the federal government has said no to states like Arizona and Georgia and Alabama and South Carolina when they've passed laws to try to regulate and to remove undocumented workers from the states there. So the federal government's taking the position that only they can regulate immigration. But there are a number of things that states can do. For example, licensing businesses is one thing. States like Rhode Island don't require that someone show legal status. Another thing that is
what types of businesses would that be?
Well, it could be, for example, a hair salon. It could be a grocery store. It could be a web design company, construction company. It could be a lawn and maintenance service.
Would that be, so that's really at the state level? In other words, for example, are there any examples where the businesses you just named might need to show immigration status or otherwise some sort of legal something in order to be established, or is Rhode Island unique in that respect? Or
no, in fact, Arizona and Georgia and Alabama and South Carolina have passed laws that require the states to check the legal status of people who are applying for business licenses. And not only that, but they're also requiring landlords to check immigration status, and they're requiring police officers to check everyone's status. So there have been a number of states that have gone totally in the opposite direction, but a number of states allow immigrants to apply for driver's licenses, and that's been a very contentious issue since 9/11.
Why is that? Why do we care if somebody's driving a car as long as they pay insurance or something?
Well, the genesis of this is that after 9/11, it was found that a number of the terrorists that boarded these planes used driver's licenses that they had obtained from various states to board planes. So in an effort to tighten up the security of state IDs, the federal government passed the Real ID Act, which requires states to check the immigration status, and what's been used is the requirement of a Social Security number. So if you don't have a Social Security number, you can't get a driver's license. Now, what a number of states have done, including Utah, Washington, and New Mexico, is instead of requiring a Social Security number to issue a regular driver's license, they issue what's called a certificate of driving ability, and then these people can very simply go and apply for a document that is not valid for identification purposes, but is valid for driving. So that's something that we can do here in the state of Rhode Island.
Okay. Check my notes real quick. Let's look to the future. What will it take at this point? I mean, we have gridlock in Washington. We understand that. What will it take in terms of either at the immigrant level, grassroots movements, or some sort of fundamental shift? What will it take to start to get the ice moving a little bit? Because right now, with the gridlock, it's certainly not looking good. I know plenty of people who are here illegally who are productive members of society, as I'm sure you do. Where's the change going to come from?
Well, It comes from our leaders, from our community leaders, from our political leaders. I think people who are elected have to look beyond perpetuating their own existence in Congress and in the state legislatures and begin to do what's right. And they need to begin to correct the myths that are frequently put out there about immigrants.
I'm glad you mentioned myths. Before we came on the air, we were chatting a little bit about, I was mentioning an AILA study. AILA is the American Immigration Lawyers Association. You're a member of it. In 2010, I believe, they released a study. It was about 50 pages long regarding the enhancement to the overall economic health of this country, of the immigrant community. I'm sure you've read it. Why don't you talk a little bit about that and just give me a sense, or give the viewers a sense of the cost-benefit analysis. In other words, the United States is spending an awful lot of money in trying to deal with the immigration problems. As you, I'm sure you know, over the last, I think, 4 or 5 years, the U.S. has deported about 400,000 people per year.
Correct.
And it's very expensive to do that. Department of Homeland Security has a roughly $60 billion budget, and that's what we know about. What would be the impact, the positive impact, if we were able to say to DOL, Department of Homeland Security, or the USCIS, United States Customs and Immigration Service, okay, we kind of don't need your services in the way that we have had to need them until now, and we are going to actually do something about the immigration problem. Talk to me about how's that going to benefit the AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, the report. I'd like you to talk to that about how will that benefit the United States over what we're spending currently.
Well, the first obvious answer to that is that we will save billions, if not in the trillions of dollars. For example, this fence that's being built across the border is not the solution. It certainly feels good to a lot of people who are security minded, but you know, we see that the people that are profiting from the building of this fence are these big corporations that are in the business of profiting, just like the weapons industry profits from war. They profit when they build these fences, and also incarcerating hundreds of thousands of people who have committed no crime.
In some cases, they're incarcerating American citizens.
And in some cases, deporting American citizens.
Yes. So
incarcerating these people is only benefiting these corporations, who, by the way, spend a lot of money lobbying some of the legislators to continue to tighten the immigration issue.
So if I understand correctly, then, is it that corporations don't want this?
Well, some corporations, certainly. Some corporations stand to benefit from erecting prisons and incarcerating undocumented folks and building fences. Absolutely. Absolutely.
What I was talking about, though, is give me a sense of, never mind saving the billions of dollars. This country was built on immigration. One of the quotes I heard recently that I really like is that all the problems of the United States can be directly attributed to bad immigration policy on the part of the American Indian. I like that. Mm-hmm. Given that that's not going to reverse itself anytime soon, give the audience a little bit of a sense of what the economy could do with all of that extra brain power, all of that extra labor power, all of that extra innovation power that can come from the immigrant community, and where the economy might actually be able to go. Could we balance the budget, for example? Could we develop cure for cancer? I mean, just give me some idea here.
Well, yes, the answer is all of those things are real possibilities with good immigration policies. I mean, look at all of the major high-tech companies that have been founded in this country over the last 10 years. They're immigrants involved in just about, I don't know what the number is, half, 75%. But you know, the immigrant innovativeness and the energy and the capital that immigrants bring to this country and invest in this country is real. And if you're an immigrant in this country and this country is telling you that you're not welcome, it's difficult for you to begin to invest in this country. So I think we stand to gain a lot, and we're, as a society, we're in this all together. So
let's take the last couple of minutes we have here and talk about, I know that you're very involved with what I might even call grassroots movements. What are some of the things that you personally do to try to help the immigrant community here in Rhode Island? And I mean, I know you were telling me before, you do speaking engagements, and you have, I know you're fluent in Spanish, so I know that you're very involved with the Latino community. Talk about that a little bit for the last few minutes of the program.
Well, one of the things that I enjoy doing is I go around and talk to undocumented immigrants about their rights. People have rights in this country. The U.S. Constitution talks about persons. It doesn't talk about only U.S. citizens or people who are here lawfully. So everyone who is in this country has certain rights, and I want to make sure that they understand that they have those rights, and I want to make sure that those rights are respected. So not only do I talk to immigrant groups, but I also go and talk to law enforcement and try, because I understand that the problem is sometimes on both sides. So working together and getting a better understanding of what the rights are and respecting the rights and how we all benefit. For example, this whole enforcement is a major problem, because if immigrants believe that the police are going to arrest them and deport them, for any reason, you have victims of crimes who don't report crimes. Mm-hmm. You have witnesses who don't come forward. So we like to make sure that law enforcement understands that it's in their best interest when immigrants trust them, and that immigrants understand that the police are going to act in their best interest, and they're not simply going to turn them over to immigration because of a traffic stop.
And you provide a liaison between the immigrant community and the police then?
I try to.
You try to? Good. Well, there should be more people like you. We are in the last minute of the program. I would like to personally thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure having you. I hope we can have you back again, because there's a lot more to talk about, as you know, comprehensive immigration reform, and I know that you do other things. So I'd love to talk about that in the future if you're willing to come back on.
All you need to do is to invite me. I'd be happy to come back.
Wonderful. Thank you much.
Sure.
Take care.